Day and night, I toss and turn, I keep stressing my mind. I look for peace, but see I don't attain what I need for keeps this silly game we play.
You're listening to Tackling the Taboo, a journey of self-discovery through Black love. Today, we're here with DJ Dupsy.
I'm Dr. J.
Under our voices is Day and Night by Kid Cudi off the album Man on the Moon, The End of Day. In this episode, we'll be speaking about mental health in the Black community. Beyond just the mental health is important conversation, which it is, we also go into the historical factors that have influenced and or impacted our access to and perception of mental health. So we're unpacking ways that we can define and attend to our mental health. Let's dive on in with Dr. J.
So I'm Jackie Ravelwin. I have a licensed marriage and family therapist certification, and I'm also have a PhD in East-West psychology. So I'm now working at CAPS as one of their psychotherapists, and I'm here specifically for the ABC students. That's my focus, so that is, African, Black, Caribbean. Although I obviously serve other students, but particularly to help ABC students be more successful here at UC Santa Cruz, so that it can then go on to carry on the message and the work with the community at large. And so, basically, I've done lots of psychotherapy for, individuals, groups, families. That's what the MFT licensure is about. But the East-West psychology degree was basically to help me be able to pull different streams together so that I could present ways of advocating for our community with the powers that be, so to speak, about what our needs are from a psychological perspective.
Sounds great.
Okay.
And we certainly appreciate, having you here. I know that's been a big ask for a lot of African, Black, and Caribbean students. I don't know if it was part of the reclamation of Kerr Hall documentation, like in terms of like those asks. I'm not sure if that would make sense if that was a part of it.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I don't want to misquote that. But I know just in general that's definitely been a need that a lot of
I believe it was one of the things that had been advocated for actually a number of years.
Yeah.
And in fact, my understanding is that the last person who held this position may have been several years ago. Not because the university didn't want anybody, but it's hard to recruit people to this area, particularly people of color. So it took a while, and I'm really glad that they continue to do that, because I'm thrilled to death to be here.
Yeah, there's another episode about like the economics of Santa Cruz, California.
Right, yeah.
But that's another episode.
That's right.
So just starting out, right, just to kind of like, I guess, frame the overall conversation before getting into, I guess, kind of nitty gritty, what you see like its trends in our community, how would you even define mental health and how you feel it impacts our bodies and our systems?
Okay, all right. So mental health is really about how do we function? Are we able to, frankly, get along with other people? Or do we have good interpersonal relationships? That means we're fostering our own mental health and social connections, as well as helping other people. It also means how do we respond to stress? How do we respond to changes that are unexpected? So are we able to combine a sense of self that's stable when these changes come, and yet at the same time can come up with flexible strategies to deal with those changes, particularly off the cuff? So that's really what good mental health is about.
So question for you, Dr. J. Why do you feel there has been a stigma built up in the Black community around even talking about mental health and emotions?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's because being Black is stigmatized. Okay. So if you know our history about how we came to the shores of the Americas, We were first kidnapped, brought across the oceans and horrific circumstances, and enslaved once we got here. And the reason how that was justified was saying that we were less than. We were not as smart. We were not as capable. We were inferior. We were, in fact, in some circles considered inhuman. So that's the first stigma. Okay. Then you put that together with if you have issues, mental health issues, which is also stigmatized. So the idea that once again, someone is less than, that you're not able to deal with problems independently, that somehow you're morally defective, that you even have these problems. So if you're already stigmatized just by being who you are, to then take on another stigmatized subject as saying that you're having mental health issues is a double-edged sword, and who wants to do that? So we push it away. We try to fend off having anyone think that there is something wrong, which is really ironic when you consider what we've been through for the last 400 years. How could we not have mental health issues?
It's the double-edged sword of the dehumanization, right?
Right.
It's I don't see you as human, so I don't need to care about you. And then on the other side, well, you must be superhuman, so all this must not have affected you.
Exactly.
Right? How do you think all that you just mentioned, right? How do you think that shows up and manifests, right, with college students today, and how do you approach,
Okay.
how do you kind of make those connections for them?
Okay, so that's like an entire, that could be another episode right there,
Right.
But okay. But again, so you think about the trauma that we've been through. Joy DeGruy calls it post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is a takeoff of post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? When she came up with that, it was like in the 1980s. But our trauma, how that relates to people has really come into the forefront, which is showing you how prescient she was about these issues. Okay, so we have had 400 years of ongoing nonstop trauma, from slavery to Jim Crow to the present day, okay? And as a consequence, what happens with trauma is it actually changes brain chemistry.
Wow.
It changes how our blood flows, the chemistry throughout it. So in other words, you cannot separate trauma away from the human organism. It impacts all of that. It impacts our DNA.
Wow.
So not only is trauma within us, but it's passed on from generation to generation. There have been studies with mice to show that even if the second generation grows up in a situation that isn't trauma-filled, they're still going to have that trauma released in their bodies if they experience some type of stressor later on. Mm. So for those of us who think that we have not been impacted by slavery, I hate to break the news to you, but yeah, it's impacted us, all of us, and not only blacks, but it also has impacted whites, because you can't traumatize somebody else without that traumatizing you. So let me explain that. Please. Post-traumatic stress disorder is the idea that not only does a person experiencing trauma traumatize their body, but if you don't see it, if you simply hear about it from somebody else that you care about, that is going to have a traumatizing effect, okay? Or if you don't know the person at all, but you witness that trauma, it's going to have a traumatizing effect. So what that means is that basically slavery, colonialism, all of these traumatic events that have happened for the last 400 years or, since Columbus got all of this started, okay, everybody has been traumatized to some extent. The question is not if we have, but how great an extent has that taken place. So for us, we need to reach the point that we can recognize, yeah, this is a part of who we are, and that is not something to be ashamed of. Remember, this was something that was done to us. But rather than trying to live in denial or be ashamed about that, the way we're going to heal from that is to, what we've always heard, we need to know our history, okay? But we also need to put it in the context of post-traumatic slave syndrome so that we have a framework to understand it, okay? And besides our history, then we also need to find other ways of healing it. And most importantly, we need to understand that healing is a lifelong process. So there is no quote unquote cure.
Right.
You know, like we can take a pill and it's going to go away, or we can forget about it. That's not forgetting about it. That's denial. That is in and of itself another manifestation of mental health issues.
Right.
Okay. So all of these things are something that we need to work on.
Right. Wow. Well, yeah. Next question was actually kind of leading into that. And so what are some ways that you think we can work on that, that can fit with inside the stereotypical couch chair, dynamic, but like what could also other kind of ways or strategies look like?
Okay. So, for example, again, it is going to be knowing about our history, but it is also going to be knowing about more than just our successes, which is definitely critical, but it particularly is more than just knowing about African American history. It's knowing about African history that is pre-slavery, all right? And we also have to make the connection that our religious traditions, as great as they have been for us, so if we're thinking about the civil rights movement, we know which was the birthplace was, the Black church, as well as other places of worship. But we also have to understand that it too is tinged with racist overtones, all right? And so what we have to do is to find a way of being able to hold those two things together. We are not really prepared to doing that. So let me give you an example.
All right.
Christianity, let's say, if you're going by the Bible, it says that basically human beings have been around for about 5,000 years, okay? But if you know science, you know that the idea of the mitochondrial Eve, okay, is the mother of humanity, which was black. Eve was black and African, okay?
The Eve
African,
gene,
right, all right. Okay, that goes back 200,000 years. So for many Black folks, we've been taught to look at the Bible literally, which means then that only gives us 5,000 out of 200,000 years. That's 195,000 years of our history that has been erased, okay, from our memory or truncated from our bodies, all right? And we really need to think about what that means. What it means is the first humans on Earth were Black and African. It means the first couple was Black and African. It means the first family unit was Black and African. It means the people who went out and first killed other animals, first of all, to survive, and then to eat, to live, were Black and African. It means the people who first farmed were Black and African. It means the first social, civil organizations. In other words, literally civilization began with Black Africans, melanated, and the reason I want to emphasize that Black Africans, okay, we know that there are also Africans and whites, but that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about melanated people, all right? So I remember when Richard Nixon, when the tapes came out and he had all of these hidden information, one of the things he said was, Blacks have never contributed anything to human civilization. Okay. When in fact, just the opposite is true. Africa is the birthplace, and Black melanated Africans are the seat of civilization. We are the creator of that. So if you're thinking about low self-esteem, poor self-concept about our own Blackness, and that is in and of itself a mental health issue. That's what Joy DeGruy was talking about in post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay, internalized racism. You can see that knowing that, how critical that is for healthy self-esteem. But if we're still holding on to what many of us were taught, that the earth has only been around 5,000 years, and that it was, started by whites, when we see Eve and Adam.
The imagery
is that they are white. And more to the point, part of Christian tradition is we are descendants of Ham, and Ham was cursed when he went in and saw his father naked, and he came out, and God turned him black as a means of punishment, for having done that. All right. Okay. So again, if you take the Bible literally, then that's the second thing that tells us.
That's how you justify chattel slavery.
Yeah, right. And it also tells us that we're no good, all right? More to the point is, when I was doing my research for my dissertation, reading slave narratives, one of them was Linda Brent, the slave girl. She talked about that, in fact, where she was located, the powers that be, or the enslavers, didn't care what religion you had, because basically they didn't care about our souls. They didn't think that it was necessary. So at that time, blacks could actually still use their African traditions, religious traditions, or spiritual traditions, okay? It was only after Nat Turner's rebellion, in which blacks went out and killed whites, that all of a sudden they cared about our souls. And so then it was necessary to teach us the Christian principles of turn the other cheek, obey God, obey your master as you would God, okay? And to just be supplicant, okay? That is when the idea of Christianity was ushered onto us, or our ancestors. So there was a hidden agenda. Not that it was really very hidden, but can you see what I mean by that which we consider our soul, for many of us, source of emotional and mental well-being, is, as I said, just as tinged with racist overtones and tropes and things to enslave our minds as anything else that we have been exposed to in slavery and since then.
Suspended within space and time, I walk a thin line, amongst the masses all alone. A furnished house with no one home. I see through walls that's hard to climb. I'm losing my mind, I'm losing my mind.
No Medicaid, no medication. Thinking you're better off dead instead. Should have been dedicated to education. I spend cylinder on my revolver. I spend cylinder. Someone explain who'd leave a dick in charge of a bush of a colon. I'm screwed. Saw more war than Warsaw, Poland. Viewed an infant's insides outside of his body, inside of a place of worship, ungodly.
The song Losing My Mind by Pharaoh Monk featuring Dinan off the album PTSD. Let's get back into our dialogue with Dr. J, getting into how we can do our own personal research to be more in harmony with the organic systems that birthed us and have been sustaining us for centuries, putting a critical lens on our social constructs and how they've impacted our perception of what's natural. Once again, I'm DJ Dupsy, and you're listening to Tackling the Taboo, a journey through the Black mind.
So this is what I mean, healing us mentally, our mental and emotional well-being and our self-concept means being able to look at the Bible, the Quran, or any other religious book that we hold sacred. We have to recognize that, like any other history book, it's been in the hands of the power structure, and the power structure is going to manipulate that to benefit the power structure, not to benefit us. In fact, it means it's going to be used in some way to our detriment.
I've tried to have this conversation with my family so many times.
Okay, all right. So this is one of the things that needs to be healed. And I'm not saying, I grew up in the Christian tradition too. I mean, I started playing the piano for church when I was 10, and I was a paid church organist by the time I was 12.
Wow.
My father was the chairman of the deacon board for like 25 years. My mother was the president of the usher board and all the other auxiliaries. So when I say I was steeped in the church, that's what I really mean, okay? Fortunately, because my parents were educators, though, they didn't take the Bible literally, and I was taught, okay, where it is affirming for people, all people, okay, we can pretty well assume that was probably God or God inspired. If, on the other hand, it starts being divisive and it's coming with us ideas that some people are better than other people and all this, okay, probably, somebody had an agenda. Okay.
It starts to sound like a rule book.
Right, okay. And so I also, and because my parents, my parents were science teachers, okay. So the idea of not having some means of reviewing, reevaluating, simply wasn't part of their own DNA. Okay. It was okay to question. And I'm so grateful to them for that. Okay. And I wish that many, and my church, I should say, applauded that at the time, St. Paul Baptist Church putting in play. But for many people who take it literally, again, that has just taken away, like I said, 195,000 years of our humanity and contributions that we gave to everybody else. So instead of this is another thing. Yeah. So, like for many people who take the Bible literally, they can be doctors, lawyers, educators, and still make this kind of statement, well, I'm glad slavery happened because it means that's how we became Christian. That's how we got exposed to Christianity.
Right.
And when I hear that, I just want to, oh my God, I cringe. Yeah. Because it's like, don't you get it?
Right.
Malcolm X said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us, okay? And that we've been bamboozled, okay?
Yes.
Well, that is part of the bamboozlement, okay? So one of the ways to heal that is to learn about our own religious, spiritual traditions, African spirituality.
So much diversity within
African principles, okay? And the reason I say that, not because I'm wanting to convert anybody, that's not the idea. But think of this, when you were in school, for some reason it was perfectly, in fact, they wanted you to study Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, everybody else's mythology. Only anything related to Black folk in Africa was somehow devil worship. All right? Catch on, folks. That's part of the bamboozlement.
Right. Okay. Or that if we do touch on Black history in the Western mainstream education system, it's we were slaves over. We were slaves. Period.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Okay. As opposed to thinking, okay, yeah, I can still be Christian or Muslim or whatever I am, but still know my African spiritual traditions because that gives me a sense of culture, just like white Christians still know Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and they don't see that there's any conflict there.
I see within the Latinx culture too.
Exactly.
Sometimes combining of indigenous faith practices with Christian rhetoric.
Everybody else, it's okay to know that, just Black folk. All right? And so I'm saying we need to get past that. We need to learn about European traditions, housing traditions, Igbo traditions, and particularly if you learn about Matian principles. So, for example, Matian principles, okay, and they're Egyptian, so we know that it's at least, maybe 10,000 years old? At least. Okay, that predates Christianity. We are part of that. Even if you're part of the larger culture that says, well, Egyptian wasn't Black. Well, it was non-white.
Whatever it was, it wasn't part of Europe.
It was not European, okay. And the 25th dynasty definitely was Black because parts of Nubia went in and conquered Egypt, okay. So we were a part of this process. And you look at, again, think of Timbuktu. We're always said that, we're not intelligent, that we didn't have anything to do with the classics with education. The University of Timbuktu is Black and African. Okay, it predates Christianity. It was there. So our learning this and understanding that, okay, yes, some of our people were, perhaps struggling, okay, but in the same way that everybody else, that when they had diverse economics, people in different economic strata. The same thing was true for Africans, okay? So there were rich Africans like Mansa Musa, okay, all right, as well as people who were financially struggling, not to mention the fact, if you're familiar with books regarding Africa, so I'm talking about Afrocentric literature, you know that in fact Africa went through tumultuous climate change at one point, and that is one of the reasons why these great civilizations went through such demoralization. So they had to travel, okay? So they became migrants, nomads, okay? That was the part of the destruction of Black African civilizations. So when we were discovered, quote unquote, by Europeans, what they saw was the latter part of the nomadic results of having suffered all of these climate changes that took place. Just like we're going through climate change now and people are being displaced.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. That's what was happening back in our history thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, I should say, pre-Christianity or pre-Islam or in other words, pre-Abrahamic religions. All right? So we need to learn this information in order to heal ourselves. It completely turns everything upside down, okay? So for something else that we need to heal. So for example, when I hear Blacks say, well, let's reclaim the N-word, I'm thinking, okay, you want to reclaim the word that they use to debase, dehumanize, degrade. That was the word that the epithet that they threw at us while they were lynching us, beating us, etc. That's what we want to reclaim, not 195,000 years of history that shows not only are we human, but again, we are the bedrock of civilization, of human civilization. All right? The fact that we would choose one over the other, to me, is yet another sign of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Okay? We don't have the concrete foundation, educational foundation, spiritual foundation to know how magnificent we as a people are. And I don't mean for us to learn that in order to be in opposition to other communities, quite the contrary. Right, all right. I'm saying that our spiritual traditions first of all, our spiritual traditions taught us that we were divine. All right. Compare that to the Christian tradition, which says we were born in sin. All right. So African spiritual traditions have the idea that we are divine because we were created with God and that God gave us the capacity to co-create with God. All right. So imagine knowing that for people who have been taught that we're basically nothing. Okay. So instead of bowing to any and everybody, instead stand up, stand erect, know, have faith that we are part of the divine creation that God brought about. Do you see how that changes the entire self-concept?
To Be Young, Gifted, and Black by Nina Simone from the album The Very Best of Nina Simone, 1967 through 1972, Sugar in My Bowl. You're listening to Tackling the Taboo, a journey through the Black mind.
There's a great truth that you should know.
right? So going back to when you asked me, what is good mental health? I said that it is, well, I missed one thing. So one thing is about loving yourself is good mental health. The other thing I said was being able to have good interpersonal relationships, okay? And the third thing I said was having both the stability to withstand change as well as the flexibility to come up with creative ways of dealing with change. All right. Who's going to be able to do that? Okay. The people who are bowing and always thinking that they're the worst there is, or the people who think that they were divinely inspired, created by God, and work with God in co-creating human life, human existence, the world, etc.
Right. Exactly.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah. I love everything you just said. And I also think of like how that also connects with like the co-creation part, right? How that also connects with our relationship with nature. Right. And how I would argue that I think that's a part of good mental health too, right? Is knowing that that we are part of an ecosystem. Right?
Exactly.
That we don't lord over it. We're not the controllers over it. We are part of it, right?
Right.
And that idea of co-creation.
Right. Well, if you don't mind my interrupting.
No, go ahead.
No, you have brought up a very important part. So let me give you an example of what you're talking about historically. Right. Okay. So, let's think of the original Eve, how we think about it. Well, there's the Christianity idea of Eve, but there's this beautiful place, lush, green, plentiful, okay. Africa at one point was like that. That's exactly why all of the diamonds, minerals,
gold, oil.
Right, everything. Again, lush, beautiful landscaping is right there. If you look at Africa, it looks like the proverbial Garden of Eden.
It does.
All right, okay. There is the idea of Chike Diop, who is an African philosopher. I forget what African country he's from, but the man was genius. So we're talking about a linguist, learned many sciences, medicine, all of these things, and did research. And he pulled all of these things together to show the history of Africa and how we were the first people, okay? So one of the things that he was saying is that when you're coming from a land of plenty, your orientation with nature is going to be positive. Remember Mother Nature, Africa? Okay, maternal? All right. So if things are plentiful, you can go up and pull down, apples, oranges, cocoa yams, whatever it is, okay? You have a very different orientation to nature. You see it as the mother, as someone or this entity is also divine and one that you care for, one that you are with, okay? And you want to take care of it because you see it as taking care of you. If you look at indigenous cultures, Native Americans, they pray and thank the animals before they kill them because they recognize that this is a divine gift, all right? Okay, on the other hand, Europeans primarily came from the Caucasus, I'm pronouncing it right, Caucasus Mountains, all right? Cold, barely livable, okay? Your orientation to Mother Nature is going to be very different. The orientation is that this is the enemy.
Wow.
All right? And so according to Michael Bradley, who is white, a Canadian who did the book called The Iceman Inheritance, when you come from that perspective, okay, you're always at odds. So there is this added aggression or the need to fight because you had to do that in order to survive, all right? And so where there was this cradle, again, according to Chike Diop, whites in the Caucasus Mountains meet blacks. They're in Africa. They don't get along so much, okay? And the whites see all of this lush green plants. Everything is just there for you, okay? But they're coming with this aggressive idea that you have to fight, that somebody has to win. It can't be co-creation or sharing. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. All right?
The ancestor pie metaphor.
Exactly. That's right. There's only one piece of pie and you got to get your slice, as opposed to, okay, why don't you just bake several pies?
Bake some for everybody, right.
Right, okay. So that's the difference between individual. We are really into, in Western culture, individualism, okay? That's the beginning of individualism, that you have to fight, okay? Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. As opposed to if you're coming from lushness, where you don't have to fight, if everything is plentiful, you're willing to share, okay? And so these two thoughts, again, spiritual principles, have been at odds and in conflict, okay? And so again, for blacks, people who are melanated, of African descent, wherever you are in the world, this is why we need to reclaim this. And again, it's not to be at odds or on top of everybody else. That's the Western mindset. But rather, it's to love ourselves and then love everybody else in the same way, including people who don't look like us. So what we have is not only going to save our mental health, it's going to save everybody's mental health. That's what it means to be Black and African, and of that African descent and those African traditions.
Wow.
Can you feel it? Can you feel it? My funky sensation. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? My funky sensation. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? My funky sensation. Can you feel it? My funky sensation. This funk is like an extra strength pain reliever. I make it feel better than you ever did before. You're just a beat indication.
Thank you for listening to Tackling the Taboo, a journey of self-discovery through Black love. Once again, I'm DJ Dupsy, and special thanks to my guest, Dr. J, for all of her wonderful insights in this episode. Certainly we'll circle back to this topic of mental health and overall emotional and holistic well-being in the near future. Our very next episode, we'll be talking about eco-social justice, ecology in general, and Black veganism. That'll feature my buddy DJ Homo Chrysalis. Here's a quick preview.
And so my research really looks at how, it looks at, environmental justice literature, like Robert Bullard, Beverly Wright, a lot of African Americans who've been in the thick of it for decades, like looking at how pollution is reproduced across racial lines.
Once again, that was a preview from our next episode, a journey into eco-social justice and Black veganism. Under my voice is the song Funky Sensation by Gwen McCrae off her self-titled album. Once again, I'm DJ Dupsy, and until the next time we tackle the taboo, stay Black and lovely.